People from Northern Ireland may be familiar already with the idea of the Circle network, which is the idea of having reactivating for public use the train line between Belfast and via Lisburn to Antrim, which is currently it's active, but it's only for rolling stock and maintenance. It's not open for use to the general public on passenger trains. So the idea is basically a passenger could set out on a journey from Belfast and head via the Larne line up to Antrim, and then head back down via the Lisburn line back to Belfast again. And this would have the major advantage of servicing Aldergrove, which, as we all know, Northern Ireland has 3 airports. They all have a railway running right past them, and yet none of them has dedicated stop. So it's a really wasted opportunity there. And the other thing is that this would allow commuters to use railway, making Belfast much more accessible from its commuter villages in the surrounding area. And of course, the big problem in Belfast is there's never enough parking for people. So people could leave their cars at home, people from the commuter villages within that circle area, and then they could just use the trains. Now, someone in England has actually come up with a similar idea, but on a much, much bigger scale. The idea is that a person starting in Liverpool or Manchester could cross the Pennines and get to Leeds in Yorkshire, and then head up to Newcastle upon Tyne as opposed to Newcastle County Down, and then on following the West Coast Line up to Scotland, to Edinburgh, and then across the Central Belt to Glasgow, and then on a mega bridge of some type, crossing the Irish Sea to get to Belfast, and then following the East Coast down to Dublin, and then crossing over again to the Bangor, not Bangor, Northern Ireland, but Bangor in Wales, and then going along the coast there of Wales to Liverpool and Manchester again. And the idea is that if they were to build this mega railway, I think they must have some idea of doing it like Snowpiercer or something, only super speed, so it's like a Japanese bullet train. What if it was travelling at 90, the whole thing, so it's like 1,000 miles, whatever, in 90 minutes, which I think is probably a little bit out there. But the reality is this. First of all, if you start in Manchester, well, the idea for HS3 was from Liverpool and Manchester over to Leeds. So, I mean, that was already a plan, and that, I think, has been cancelled, which is very unfair. I think that it's theoretically doable. If the political will was there, then it would have been done by now. And then people keep talking, the London politicians always talking about the northern powerhouse and how they promise to invest in the north of England. Well, again, continuing that railway from Leeds on up to Newcastle upon Tyne. Or, let's be honest, I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever going to actually create a new super railway. It doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. But they could upgrade existing lines and provide extra services. Now, obviously, the whole point of privatization was to screw over the rail user. So yes, that's not really a doable thing. But God forbid an actual decent government got in power in the UK, upgrading rail lines and providing better services, all the way from, say, Liverpool to via Manchester and Leeds up to Newcastle upon Tyne. And I mean, I've personally travelled as far north on that West Coast Line, as far north as Aberdeen, and practically down to London. So yes, I know that there is an East Coast Line there already in existence. And I know that the line does go actually from Newcastle upon Tyne all the way up to Edinburgh. Now, one can travel from Edinburgh to Glasgow. However, those people in the know will tell you that actually Glasgow has two different train stations. So if you want to travel from the East Coast Line to the West Coast Line, you actually have to disembark, take your luggage, race across through the pedestrianised city centre of Glasgow, and then get to the other station. So again, using existing lines might have a bit of a problem there. I mean, if you're going to build a new line, you may as well build the best line you can rather than just, work with the pre-existing technologies that date back to the 1800s. So anyway, once you're in Glasgow using existing railways, you would then travel south through Ayr and whatever, and you would find yourself at Stranraer. Now, the reason the railway line ends at Stranraer is because that's where the ferry boats to Larne in Northern Ireland used to come in. And unfortunately, those boats were small enough to fit into the harbour. Since then, there are new ferry boats, and they are much larger, and they go from the larger port of Belfast to the larger port of Cairnryan, which is separate from the port of Stranraer. So, in other words, you would take the train all the way down to Stranraer, and then, well, that train line, again, much like making a Glasgow connection, you're going to have to not only, I suppose, bypass Glasgow, you're also going to have to extend the railway from Stranraer all the way down to Cairnryan, and then you have the ferry boat issue. Now, the reason that we use ferry boats and not on a massive 20-mile railway bridge from the coast of Scotland to Northern Ireland, it's very simple. In 1945, whenever the British government accepted the surrender of the Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, we were left with vast amounts of surplus military hardware, ordnance, explosives basically, and and there was nowhere to put it and nowhere to store it, and the Russians were technically our friends, so nobody thought, oh yeah, let's keep all this stuff in case 5 years from now things kick off with Stalin. So what they did was they loaded it on ships and they steamed out into the middle of the Irish Sea, and they dumped it overboard into a place called Beaufort's Dyke, which is the deepest part of, it's a big massive trench in the ocean floor, the deepest part of the Irish Channel, and it is directly between Northern Ireland and Scotland. And the reason nobody's going to build any mega structures there anytime soon is because there's like 1 million tons of unexploded God knows what laying down there, including I think probably most of our mustard gas supply and whatever was left over. So all this nasty corrosive stuff is there, and if you start putting big pylons or whatever through it, not only is it incredibly deep, but it's probably going to explode. Or what has happened in the past is underwater activity has dislodged stuff, and then explosives washing up on the shore. Next thing you know, someone's out walking their dog, boom, or some kitties playing with something in the ocean, and out for a wee swim, and yes, that is not going to look good on the front page of any newspaper. So no, I don't think there's going to be any massive superstructures built crossing the Irish Channel. Now, of course, there is an alternative. What they could do is from Glasgow go all the way up and down the Mull of Kintyre, and then a bridge over an even longer distance, but not as shockingly deep or as explosive, and then that bridge could come ashore near Ballycastle. And then what happens when you have Ballycastle is there used to be a light railway there, and that will be covered in a future video, the route of that. And then that went to, from Ballycastle, it went to Ballymoney, and then just followed the main line south there. Now the light railway is separate from the main railway, and when the main railway was upgraded, the light railway was abolished rather than become part of the railway network. But anyway, that's just another complication, and I think if we're talking about upgrading existing systems, we would ignore that, and we would treat that as something separate. We would stick with the ferry boats for the time being. Now, if you arrive off the ferry boat in Belfast, and then you would get on the train at Grand Central. Now, I don't think there's actually a convenient railway station for an internal connection. I suppose there's always the what they call now the York Street station, but it's not really well located. I'm afraid it was the end of the line for the old system, and then they connected it all up in the 80s. But anyway, that's a different story. So when everyone gets to Grand Central Station, you would then get the Enterprise system. The Enterprise is a cross-border pre-existing railway connection, and it goes from Belfast down to Dublin. Dublin does have an airport, but they do not have a railway connection there yet. But they're actually talking about it. And yes, Dublin is trying to do the one thing that Belfast and the rest of Northern Ireland could do very easily, and yet we aren't bothered to even try to build, railway platforms or make accessible the railways connection to the 3 airports we have. Dublin, on the other hand, they're doing it the other way around. They're going to build an actual railway extension specifically for their airport, to make their airport more accessible. And then everyone wonders, why is everyone going to Dublin for their flights? Why aren't they using Aldergrove? Why aren't they using Belfast? Oh, for crying out loud. Because you can get to Dublin easier, and it takes you where you want to go. I mean, and the thing is that the railway, as I've said, the Enterprise system going down all the way to Dublin, it is a cross-border international border crossing train, and yet it's very smooth and simple, and it's a direct express service. My personal view is that it should also have an additional stop at Lisburn, and then I could join up with the Belfast Circle network, so that people could get off from the Aldergrove station, get off at Lisburn, and then get on the Enterprise there, rather than having to go all the way into Belfast and then all the way out again, which would add an extra 30 or 40 minutes to their journey. So yes, that would make things a lot easier for everyone. Instead of having to change it to Belfast Grand Central, they could just change it to Lisburn, and that would mean less hassle for them, and they'd be down to Dublin a lot faster. But anyway, I suppose these days, if people want to go to Dublin, they just use Dublin Airport, and if people want to go to Belfast, they still use Dublin Airport. So, where were we? People from Belfast to Dublin, you're at Dublin, you want to get back to Wales, you take the ferry boat. Now that goes to Holyhead. Holyhead is not mentioned as a potential stop for this English Circle Line, but it should be, because then if you had a railway straight from there down to Bangor, not Bangor County Down, but Bangor in Wales, and then along the coast again to Liverpool and Manchester, and it would, well, the big problem is really the 2 ferry crossings. That's your real bottlenecks, and I don't think that making bridges there is in any way a good idea. But I do think that upgrading the existing railway networks so that a person could potentially travel starting in Holyhead, maybe off the boat from Dublin, you could be able to travel all the way to Liverpool, Manchester, by some, super fast, souped up, upgraded railway system. And, the networks are there. I think it's really about providing the services. And again, why shouldn't you be able to travel from, Holyhead to Liverpool, or Liverpool to Leeds, Leeds to, Manchester, and or going the other way up to Newcastle. I mean, you're connecting the East Coast line with the HS3 line. I suppose some people would just say, why don't you use the other way and upgrade the West Coast line, which would just go straight up from Manchester up to Glasgow. And but that obviously cuts out Leeds, it cuts out Newcastle upon Tyne, both of which are megacities. By definition, a city with multiple millions of people in it is a megacity. So Dublin is a megacity as well. And I know some people are only familiar with the term megacity in terms of Megacity 1, but it's a real thing. And these are real megacities. And again, the central belt of Scotland, I think that if we were to upgrade existing systems and make these systems more connected. I mean, I've mentioned repeatedly the airports, If you're flying in from the States, you need to get from the airport to the train, and the trains should be the way to travel intercity. The short hops, people should not be using intercity air transport. It should be fast trains all the way. And it would be so much better. So I think all in all, this idea, which I'm sure is in no way a serious idea, but if you take out the bridges and you go with an upgraded ferry service, and you have better connections for the airports, better connections for the ferry boats, and better services and upgraded existing systems, it could help a lot of people. And ultimately, the world would be a better place if they were to upgrade these specific railway lines, upgrade the technology, update the services, and integrate everything so that the ferry boats and the airlines and the airports are all working together so that everyone can get where they want to go when they want to go there. So, thank you very much for listening. And please remember to like, follow, and subscribe. And of course, if you disagree with me, I'm sure you will be more than happy to leave something in the comments section. So thank you very much. Goodbye.